My name is Harper, and am 28 years old. I work as a software engineer at my family's tech company, or at least I did until 2 weeks ago. I was standing in my father's office, listening to him tell me I was suspended without pay until I apologized to my younger sister for accusations I knew were true. Everyone expected me to break down, to beg, to cave under the pressure like I always had before. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye and said one word that would change everything. All right. The shock on his face was almost worth the years of pain. My sister Brielle stood behind him with her arms crossed, confident smile already fading into confusion. They had no idea what that simple word actually meant, or how badly they were about to regret pushing me to this breaking point. Before I tell you exactly how my resignation destroyed everything they took for granted, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button because this story is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when they finally realized what they lost. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Growing up, I learned early that I would always come second to Brielle in my father's eyes. My dad Richard built his tech company from absolutely nothing, working brutal hours and making countless sacrifices to create something successful. I admired him for that, and I wanted nothing more than to make him proud. I threw myself into academics, earning straight A grades throughout high school while Brielle barely scraped by with C averages. I went to college and earned a computer science degree, then pushed further to get my MBA while working part-time. Brielle went to college too, eventually graduating with a communications degree after switching majors 3 times and taking an extra year because she failed too many classes the first time around. The difference was that I worked for everything while Brielle partied her way through university on Dad's unlimited credit card. When I turned 22, I joined the family company, and Dad made it clear I would start from the bottom, despite being the owner's daughter. I respected that decision because I wanted to earn my place legitimately. I spent years working late nights and long weekends, taking on the projects nobody else wanted, proving myself with every line of code I wrote. I worked my way up through pure skill and dedication, leading major projects that brought in significant revenue and building systems that became the backbone of our entire operation. By the time I was 26, I was leading a team of 8 talented engineers who genuinely respected my technical abilities and leadership style. We accomplished incredible things together, and I felt proud of what we built even if Dad never quite acknowledged it the way I hoped he would. Brielle, on the other hand, graduated college at 23 and immediately received the title of Vice President of Marketing, despite having 0 professional experience. She was 25 now, and in those 2 years, she had done virtually nothing to earn her inflated salary and corner office. She missed meetings constantly, showed up late when she did attend, and submitted marketing presentations that were clearly plagiarized from online sources. I lost count of how many times I caught her taking credit for ideas my team developed, standing in front of clients and presenting our technical innovations as if she had conceptualized them herself. My engineers complained to me privately, frustrated that their hard work was being attributed to someone who barely understood what our software actually did. My mother was the only person who truly saw my worth and made sure I knew it. She would tell me how proud she was of my accomplishments, how my intelligence and work ethic amazed her, how I was going to do incredible things in my career. When she died 3 years ago after a sudden illness, I lost my only real advocate in the family. After her death, Dad's favoritism toward Brielle intensified dramatically. It was like he poured all his grief into protecting and spoiling my sister even more than before, as if keeping Brielle happy somehow honored Mom's memory. I tried to understand it, tried to be patient, tried to believe that eventually he would notice how hard I worked and how little Brielle contributed. I stayed at the company despite the unfairness because I genuinely loved the work itself. I loved coding, solving complex technical problems, mentoring my team members, and building systems that made a real difference for our clients. I loved seeing a project through, from initial concept to final deployment, knowing that my skills and dedication had created something valuable. I kept hoping that one day Dad would finally see past his blind spot, where Brielle was concerned, and recognize that I had become the backbone of his company's technical operations. I told myself that patience would eventually pay off, that merit would ultimately matter more than favoritism. I was wrong about that, but it took me 28 years to finally accept the truth. 2 weeks before my suspension, my team completed the most significant project we had ever undertaken. We had spent 14 months developing an advanced artificial intelligence integration system that revolutionized how our software processed and analyzed data for clients. I had personally led every aspect of the project, from initial architecture design to final testing protocols, working countless hours to ensure everything functioned flawlessly. The system was genuinely innovative, pushing boundaries in ways that our competitors hadn't achieved yet, and I felt incredibly proud of what we had accomplished together as a team. The completion of this project came at the perfect time because the company had just landed its biggest client ever, a Fortune 500 corporation that would dramatically increase our revenue and industry reputation. Dad organized a celebration dinner with potential investors to showcase our capabilities and demonstrate why we deserved their financial backing. This was a massive opportunity, the kind of event that could take the company to an entirely new level. The presentation at this dinner would be crucial, and I spent days perfecting every slide and talking point to ensure we made the strongest possible impression. The day before the dinner, Brielle approached me in the office with an unusually friendly demeanor. She asked if she could see the presentation details, because Dad wanted her to be prepared to answer questions from the marketing perspective. I was exhausted from the long project and still naive enough to trust my own sister, so I shared the complete presentation deck with her, including all my technical explanations and implementation details. She thanked me sweetly and said she just wanted to make sure she understood everything, so she could support me properly during the event. I actually felt grateful that she seemed interested in my work for once. The night of the dinner arrived, and I sat at the table with Dad, Brielle, our potential investors, and the new Fortune 500 client representatives. When the time came for the presentation, I reached for my laptop to begin, but Brielle suddenly stood up and announced that she would be presenting tonight. I looked at her in confusion, then noticed Dad nodding approvingly as if this had been the plan all along. My stomach dropped as Brielle opened her own laptop and began projecting slides onto the screen. Slides that I immediately recognized as mine because I had created every single one of them. But something was horribly different. Everywhere my name had appeared as project lead, Brielle's name now appeared instead. Every reference to my team had been changed to my development team, as if she had led the engineers. Every technical achievement I had described in my own words now came out of Brielle's mouth as she stood there speaking with surprising confidence, clearly having rehearsed extensively. She presented my 14 months of work, my innovative solutions, my system architecture, my leadership accomplishments, all as if they were hers. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. The investors were thoroughly impressed, nodding and smiling as Brielle spoke. Dad beamed with pride, occasionally interjecting to brag about his daughter's technical brilliance and leadership skills. The Fortune 500 representatives asked detailed questions, and Brielle deflected smoothly, saying she could provide more technical documentation later or connect them with team members for implementation specifics. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked for my input. Nobody seemed to notice that the actual creator of the system sat silently witnessing her work being stolen in real time. When the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, I excused myself and went to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe and process what had just happened. Brielle followed me in a few minutes later, and when I confronted her, she actually laughed in my face. "Dad loves me more," she said with cruel satisfaction. "You'll always be invisible no matter what you accomplish. Deal with it." I kept my voice calm despite the rage and pain coursing through me. "This was my work and you know it," I said quietly. She smirked and replied, "Prove it." "Oh wait, all the files have my name on them now. I updated them yesterday when I accessed your computer." That's when I realized she had gone into my office the previous day and systematically changed the ownership information on all my project files. We shared the same office suite with connected workspaces, and she had clearly spent hours modifying every document to replace my name with hers. The presentation deck I had given her was just the final piece she needed to complete her theft. She had planned this deliberately, methodically, knowing exactly what she was doing, and confident that she would get away with it because she always did. The next morning, I went straight to Dad's office with evidence. I brought original drafts with timestamps showing my authorship, email chains documenting my leadership throughout the project, and statements from 3 team members willing to testify that I had led everything. I presented it all calmly and professionally, explaining exactly what Brielle had done and providing proof that the presentation she gave had been completely plagiarized from my work. Dad looked through some of the evidence but quickly grew irritated. "You're jealous of your sister's success," he said dismissively. "This is embarrassing behavior from someone your age. Brielle has been working hard, and you can't stand seeing her shine for once." I insisted that he look at the timestamps, the email metadata, anything that would prove my case. My voice rose as frustration overtook my usual careful control. That's when Brielle arrived, and somehow she had perfect timing as always. Her eyes immediately filled with tears as she looked between me and Dad. "Why does Harper hate me so much?" she asked in a wounded voice. "I worked so hard on that project, stayed late so many nights, and now she's trying to take credit for everything. I don't understand why she's doing this to me." The performance was flawless, and Dad bought every word. He stood up from his desk and delivered his verdict. "Harper, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will not have access to the building, the systems, or any company resources. When you are ready to apologize to your sister for these false accusations and this harassment, we can discuss you returning to work. Until then, I don't want to see you here." I looked at Brielle and saw the satisfied smirk she couldn't quite hide behind her fake tears. I looked at Dad and saw that he had already made up his mind that no amount of evidence would change his determination to believe Brielle over me. Several of my team members had gathered near the office door, having heard the raised voices, and they looked absolutely horrified at what they were witnessing. The room went completely silent as everyone waited for my response. Dad expected me to break down immediately, to cry and beg for forgiveness, to apologize to Brielle right there, and promise to never question her again. Brielle stood with her arms crossed, confident that I would crumble under the pressure, as I had done countless times before when faced with Dad's disappointment. My team members watched anxiously from the doorway, clearly wanting to defend me but unsure how to intervene without risking their own positions. Instead of any of the reactions they anticipated, I took a slow breath and said one word: "All right." Just like that, calm and even, as if Dad had asked me to pick up coffee instead of delivering what he thought was devastating punishment. "I'll take the suspension," I continued in the same unnaturally steady voice. Then I turned and walked out of his office with my head high and my shoulders straight, maintaining dignity even as my world crumbled around me. The confusion on their faces would have been funny if the situation weren't so painful. Dad actually looked thrown off balance, his mouth opening slightly as if he wanted to call me back and demand a different reaction. Brielle's confident smile faltered into uncertainty because my calm acceptance wasn't part of the script she had expected. They had wielded the suspension as a weapon meant to force my immediate compliance, and instead I had simply accepted it and walked away. They didn't know what to do with that response. I went directly to my desk and began calmly packing my personal items into a box. I removed the photos from my mother's memorial, the awards I had earned for various projects, the small plant my team had given me last year for my birthday, all the little pieces of my work life that actually mattered. My hands didn't shake, my eyes stayed dry, and my movements remained methodical and controlled. Several team members approached cautiously, offering to testify on my behalf, or even threatening to resign in protest. I declined their offers gently but firmly. "Don't do anything rash," I told them quietly. "You have families to support, mortgages to pay, careers to protect. I'll handle this situation my way, but I need you all to keep working hard and taking care of each other." Marcus, my senior engineer and the team member I trusted most, pulled me aside and insisted in an urgent whisper that the entire team had my back. "We all know what really happened," he said. "Well, go to your father together. Well, make him listen. Well, prove that Brielle stole your work." I put my hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eye. "I appreciate that more than you know, but this isn't your fight. My father made his choice, and nothing you say will change his mind, because this isn't really about the presentation. This is about 28 years of him choosing to believe in Brielle instead of me. I'm done fighting for his approval." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but he saw something in my expression that made him simply nod and step back. I finished packing, carried my box through the office, and drove home to my apartment in silence. Once inside, I set the box down and sat on my couch, staring at nothing in particular. I wasn't crying, which surprised me because I had certainly cried plenty of times over Dad's favoritism throughout my life. This time felt different because something fundamental had shifted inside me during that walk out of his office. I wasn't angry in the explosive way I had been that morning when confronting him with evidence. Instead, I felt cold clarity settling over me like a protective shield. I realized with absolute certainty that this was the final straw after years of accumulated injuries. Every time Dad had praised Brielle's mediocre efforts while barely acknowledging my genuine achievements, every time he had given her opportunities she hadn't earned while making me fight for everything, every time he had believed her lies over my truth, all of it had built toward this moment. The suspension itself wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that my father had shown me once and for all that he would never see my worth, would never choose me, would never believe in me the way he automatically believed in Brielle. And if I went back and apologized just to keep the peace like I always had before, I would be accepting that dynamic for the rest of my life. So I made a decision as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment. I wouldn't apologize in return. I wouldn't fight to prove myself to someone who would never acknowledge the proof. I wouldn't spend one more day of my life begging for crumbs of recognition from a man who was determined not to see me. Instead, I would leave permanently, but I would do it strategically in a way that demonstrated exactly what they were losing. I would show them my value by removing it completely from their lives. I spent the entire evening documenting everything systematically. I compiled evidence of every project I had led, every system I had built, every innovation I had created, every contribution I had made to the company's success over 6 years of dedicated work. I created backups of all the proprietary code I had written and all the architectural designs I had developed, making sure I had copies of everything that proved my technical expertise. I carefully reviewed my employment contract and discovered something Dad had overlooked. There was no non-compete clause. He had been so confident that I would never leave the family company that he hadn't bothered to include the standard legal protection that would have prevented me from working for competitors. I pulled up old emails I had ignored over the past 2 years from the CEO of our main competitor, a company called Tech Vanguard that had been trying to recruit me repeatedly. The CEO had sent increasingly generous offers, recognizing my technical reputation in the industry even if my own father didn't. I reread those emails with new eyes, seeing them not as betrayal but as opportunity. Then I smiled for the first time in days, a real smile that came from the relief of finally making a decision I should have made years ago. I wasn't going to beg to be treated fairly at Dad's company. I was going to build a better life, somewhere that actually valued what I brought to the table. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I contacted James, the CEO of Tech Vanguard, and arranged a discreet lunch meeting for that same day. We met at a restaurant across town where nobody from Dad's company would see us, and James greeted me warmly with obvious curiosity about why I had finally reached out after ignoring his recruitment attempts for so long. I was direct with him, explaining that I was currently suspended from my family company and looking for new opportunities where my skills would be properly valued. James listened intently as I described my technical background without going into personal family details. He asked smart questions about the projects I had led and the systems I had built, clearly already familiar with my professional reputation in the industry. Tech Vanguard was a direct competitor to Dad's company, slightly smaller in overall size but growing rapidly with an excellent reputation for innovation and treating employees well. When I finished explaining my background, James didn't hesitate for even a moment before offering me the position of Chief Technology Officer immediately. The offer was extraordinary. The salary was double what I had been making at Dad's company, which was already substantial. Beyond the base pay, the package included significant equity in Tech Vanguard, meaning I would own a piece of the company and benefit directly from its success. I would have complete authority over all technical operations, a large budget for hiring and development, and a seat on the executive board. It was everything I had worked toward my entire career, the recognition and responsibility I had earned but never received from my father. I took a breath and made a bold counteroffer. I told James that I wanted to bring my entire team with me, all 8 engineers who had worked under my leadership at Dad's company. I explained that they were extraordinarily talented, that we worked together seamlessly, and that they had privately expressed frustration with the company's management and culture. James leaned back in his chair, considering carefully, and I could see him running calculations about the competitive advantage of acquiring not just me but an entire established technical team in one move. He agreed without much hesitation. He had been trying to poach Dad's engineers for years without success because they were loyal to me, not to the company. If I came to Tech Vanguard and brought them along, James would instantly acquire a fully functional development team with established working relationships and proven results. He promised competitive salary increases for all of them, better titles reflecting their actual skills, equity packages for the senior members, and a collaborative culture where technical expertise was genuinely respected. It was an offer I knew my team wouldn't be able to refuse if I presented it to them properly. Over the next week, I secretly met with each of my 8 team members individually, always away from the office and at different locations to avoid raising suspicions. I presented the opportunity honestly, explaining my own decision to leave and the offers James had made for each of them. I made it clear that they should only follow me if it was genuinely the best career move for them personally, not out of loyalty or anger at my treatment. Every single one of them agreed enthusiastically to jump ship with me, some within minutes of hearing the offer and others after a day of consideration. Marcus summed up the consensus when he told me, "Harper, we've been following your leadership for years because you're brilliant at what you do and you treat us with respect. The company name on our paychecks doesn't matter nearly as much as having a leader who values our work and pushes us to grow. If you're going to Tech Vanguard, then that's where we want to be too." We coordinated carefully, planning to submit all our resignations simultaneously for maximum impact. The timing would be devastating for Dad's company, losing its entire core technical team in one day, but I felt no guilt about it anymore. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. Meanwhile, back at Dad's company, things started falling apart almost immediately without my oversight. I heard through my team members that Brielle was completely overwhelmed trying to handle communications with the Fortune 500 client, who had begun asking detailed technical questions she couldn't answer. The client was growing increasingly frustrated with the vague responses and delays, expressing concerns about whether the company could actually deliver on its promises. The codebase developed bugs that my team would normally have caught and fixed within hours, but with me suspended and the team demoralized, problems accumulated without resolution. Dad called me twice during that first week, and I let both calls go to voicemail. Brielle called multiple times, and I blocked her number entirely after the third attempt. I had nothing to say to either of them until my plans were fully in place. On day 10 of my suspension, Dad left a voicemail that revealed his growing panic. "Harper, we need you back at the office. The Fortune 500 client has concerns about project timelines and technical capabilities. Just apologize to your sister for the misunderstanding, and we'll move forward like this never happened. Call me back today." I listened to the message once, noted the desperation creeping into his voice, and deleted it without responding. I was busy doing something much more important than responding to his belated recognition that he actually needed me. I was signing my contract with Tech Vanguard, finalizing the details of my CTO position, and preparing for my team members to deliver their coordinated resignations. On day 12 of my suspension, all 8 of my engineers submitted their 2-week notices at exactly the same time, creating immediate chaos in Dad's office as he tried to understand what was happening and why his entire technical team was abandoning him simultaneously. Day 14 of my suspension began with controlled chaos at Dad's company as all 8 engineers reached the end of their notice period and prepared to leave permanently. Dad called an emergency meeting, demanding explanations for what he saw as coordinated betrayal. The engineers arrived at his office, maintaining professional courtesy but with firm resolve. They had already made their decisions, already signed contracts with Tech Vanguard, and already packed their personal belongings from their desks. Dad tried every tactic he could think of to convince them to stay. He offered salary increases that were substantial, but still less than what Tech Vanguard had promised. He talked about loyalty and history, reminding them of opportunities he had given them and projects they had built together. He tried to make them feel guilty, saying that leaving now would destroy timelines and damage client relationships. The engineers listened politely but remained unmoved, giving vague responses about pursuing better career opportunities elsewhere, without specifying where they were going or why they were all leaving at once. Finally, Dad demanded directly that they tell him which companies had recruited them. He wanted names so he could contact those companies and accuse them of poaching employees, perhaps even pursue legal action. The engineers declined to provide that information, citing confidentiality agreements they had signed with their new employers. Dad's face reddened with frustration as he realized he had no leverage to stop them and no legal grounds to prevent their departure. His company's employment contracts were standard at-will agreements, and he had never implemented non-compete clauses for anyone except a few senior executives, and my team wasn't included in that group. Marcus, who had remained mostly quiet during the meeting while younger engineers deflected, Dad's pressure, finally spoke up with calm conviction. "You want to know why we're leaving," he said. "We're leaving because you gave Harper nothing but disrespect, despite her building the technical foundation of this entire company. She led us. She mentored us. She protected us from unreasonable demands. And she created systems that made us all better at our jobs. Then you suspended her for telling the truth about something we all witnessed. We're following her because she's the kind of leader worth following." The color drained from Dad's face as the implications hit him. "Harper," he repeated slowly. "Harper doesn't have another job. She's suspended and dealing with her attitude problem." Marcus shook his head with something that looked almost like pity. "Harper was hired as Chief Technology Officer at Tech Vanguard 2 weeks ago, right after you suspended her. We're all going with her because she offered us positions there, and we'd rather work for someone who values what we do than stay here and watch Brielle take credit for our work, like she took credit for Harper's presentation." Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Tech Vanguard," he demanded, his voice rising. "Our direct competitor? You can't be serious. Harper would never betray me like that." Marcus gathered his things and moved toward the door, the other engineers following his lead. "She didn't betray you, sir. You pushed her away, and she landed somewhere better. That's not betrayal. That's consequence." With that, all 8 of them walked out of the office, leaving Dad standing alone in shocked silence. Dad immediately tried calling me, but I had blocked his number days earlier in anticipation of this moment. He sent Brielle to my apartment that evening, but I simply didn't answer the door when she rang the bell repeatedly and called my name through the door. I sat quietly inside, listening to her increasingly frantic pleas for me to talk to her, to explain what was happening, to stop whatever I was doing. Eventually she gave up and left, and I returned to preparing for my first day at Tech Vanguard the following Monday. On the evening of day 14, Dad showed up at my apartment himself. I saw him through the peephole, noted his haggard appearance and tense posture, and almost didn't open the door. But I realized I owed myself the satisfaction of this conversation, the chance to say things I should have said years ago. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside, instead standing in the doorway with my arms crossed and my expression neutral. Dad immediately launched into a confusing mixture of anger and panic. "You're stealing my employees," he demanded. "You're going to work for my biggest competitor and you're taking my entire technical team with you? After everything I've done for you, after building this company to give you opportunities, this is how you repay me." I let him finish his rant without interrupting, watching him wind himself up with righteous indignation that didn't match reality. When he finally paused for breath, I responded calmly. "I didn't steal anyone. Every single one of those engineers chose to leave on their own because your company culture is toxic, and they were tired of watching Brielle take credit for their work. I simply gave them the option of coming with me to somewhere better, and they all said yes immediately. That should tell you something about how they felt working for you." Dad switched tactics, trying a more conciliatory approach. "Look, this is all about the suspension, right? You're upset, and I understand that. Just apologize to Brielle, come back to the company, and bring your team back with you. Well, forget this whole mess and move forward together as a family." I actually laughed at that suggestion, a short, bitter sound that made him flinch. "I'm not coming back, Dad. Not today, not next week, not ever. I'm done apologizing for existing in Brielle's shadow. I'm done begging you to see my worth. I'm done building my life around hoping you'll finally be proud of me." His tone shifted again into threats, revealing the anger underneath his attempted manipulation. "You'll regret this decision, Harper. I have connections throughout this industry, and I'll make sure you never work anywhere successfully. I'll destroy your reputation before you even start at Tech Vanguard. You're making a huge mistake." I smiled at him then, a genuine smile that came from knowing I held all the cards in this situation. "I already have a signed contract as Chief Technology Officer, with an excellent salary and equity package. I start Monday morning with my full team coming with me. You can try to damage my reputation, but my work speaks for itself to anyone who actually pays attention." Dad's face went pale as another realization hit him. "You signed a non-compete agreement when you joined my company. You can't legally work for a competitor for at least 2 years. I'll sue you and Tech Vanguard for breach of contract." I shook my head slowly, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. "Actually, I don't have a non-compete clause. I checked my contract very carefully before accepting Tech Vanguard's offer. You never included one when I joined 6 years ago, probably because you never imagined I would leave the family company. That was a costly oversight on your part." I watched him realize the legal mistake he had made, saw the exact moment when he understood that he had no way to stop me from doing exactly what I was doing. He tried one more approach, his voice dropping into something that almost sounded sincere. "Harper, please. You're my daughter. We're family. That has to mean something. Don't throw away our relationship over a business disagreement." I met his eyes directly and said the words I had needed to say for 28 years. "You made it clear who your real daughter is every single day of my life. You chose Brielle over me in every situation that mattered, believed her lies over my evidence, praised her mediocrity while ignoring my accomplishments. I'm not throwing away our relationship, Dad. You did that yourself over decades of favoritism and willful blindness. I'm just finally accepting reality and building a life where I don't need your approval to know my own worth." Then I stepped back inside my apartment and closed the door firmly in his face. I heard him stand there for a long moment, perhaps hoping I would change my mind and open it again, but eventually his footsteps retreated down the hallway. I leaned against the closed door, feeling the weight of years finally lifting from my shoulders. The little girl who had tried so hard to earn her father's love was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her value regardless of whether he could see it. The first week without me and my team was catastrophic for Dad's company in ways that became immediately obvious to everyone. Critical systems started experiencing failures that would normally have been caught and resolved within hours by my engineers. Without our expertise, problems cascaded into larger issues that affected multiple clients simultaneously. Brielle tried desperately to manage the technical crisis, calling in expensive external contractors who didn't understand our proprietary systems and couldn't fix problems efficiently. The Fortune 500 client grew increasingly concerned as promised deliverables were delayed and technical questions went unanswered. Then someone, an anonymous source who was likely one of the engineers still finishing their transition period, sent the client proof of Brielle's presentation plagiarism. The evidence included original timestamps showing my authorship of everything she had presented as her own work. The client was furious at the deception, immediately withdrawing their contract and demanding a full refund of the substantial deposit they had paid. They also threatened legal action for misrepresentation and fraud, claiming that the company had deliberately deceived them about who had actually developed the AI integration system. News of the scandal spread rapidly through our industry because the Fortune 500 company made their displeasure public as a warning to other potential clients. Dad's company lost credibility overnight, with industry analysts questioning the leadership and integrity of the organization. 2 more significant clients left within days, citing concerns about the company's ability to deliver on technical promises without the team that had actually built their systems. The clients weren't wrong to worry because without my engineers, there was nobody left with deep knowledge of the proprietary code and architecture we had developed over years. Dad tried desperately to hire replacement engineers, posting job listings and conducting interviews, but experienced professionals didn't want to join what was clearly a sinking ship. The few candidates who did show interest were junior developers without the expertise needed to maintain complex systems, and even they withdrew their applications once they researched the company's recent troubles. The technical team that remained, engineers who hadn't been part of my core group, were overwhelmed and demoralized, struggling to keep basic operations running while fielding angry calls from clients experiencing problems. The company's valuation dropped 40% in just 3 weeks as investors reassessed its worth without the technical capabilities that had made it competitive. Dad's plans for expansion evaporated as funding dried up and partnerships fell through. Board members started asking difficult questions about leadership decisions and succession planning, making it clear that they had lost confidence in management's judgment. Meanwhile, I was thriving at Tech Vanguard in ways that felt almost surreal after years of being undervalued. My team integrated smoothly into the company culture, and James gave us the resources and autonomy we needed to do our best work. Within the first month, I developed a new artificial intelligence system that was significantly more advanced than what I had built at Dad's company. I had learned from the previous project's limitations and designed something cleaner, faster, and more scalable. Tech Vanguard announced the breakthrough with significant fanfare, and industry publications immediately took notice. Several major tech magazines featured articles about the innovation, and they all prominently credited me by name as the Chief Technology Officer who had led the development. The articles mentioned that I had recently left a family business to pursue better opportunities at Tech Vanguard, though they didn't include the ugly personal details. The headlines called me a tech genius, finally getting the recognition she deserves, and praised Tech Vanguard for having the wisdom to recruit someone of my caliber. It was the kind of public acknowledgement I had never received in 6 years at Dad's company, and it felt validating in ways I hadn't expected. Dad saw those articles because people in the industry made sure to send them to him, enjoying the drama of his daughter's success at a competitor. I heard through former colleagues that he had looked absolutely humiliated when someone showed him an article with my photo and a detailed description of my accomplishments. My aunt tried to convince me that Dad was too proud to admit his mistakes, but that he was hurting badly. He knows he was wrong about the suspension, she insisted. He's just too stubborn to say it directly. Can't you be the bigger person and reach out to him? I felt that familiar pressure to accommodate, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own feelings for family harmony, but I resisted it firmly. I was the bigger person for 28 years. I told her, I'm done shrinking myself to make other people comfortable with their bad behavior. Dad knows where I am if he wants to have an honest conversation, but I'm not going to chase his approval anymore. 2 months after I left, Dad's company lost 3 more major clients specifically to Tech Vanguard. It turned out that those clients had stayed with Dad's company primarily because of the systems my team had built and maintained. Without us there, they had no reason to remain loyal, especially when Tech Vanguard offered them better technology at competitive prices. Each client that switched felt like vindication, proof that my work had been valuable even if Dad had never acknowledged it properly. Brielle tried desperately to fill the technical leadership void, attending meetings and attempting to manage projects she didn't understand. She made a critical error in one client implementation that cost the company $200,000 to fix, requiring them to hire an expensive consulting firm to undo her mistakes. When Dad found out about the costly error, he finally snapped at Brielle in a way he never had before, and I heard about the confrontation from someone who witnessed it. "You have no idea what you're doing," Dad had shouted at her in front of other employees. "Every decision you make creates more problems because you don't have the technical knowledge to do this job." Brielle had looked shocked and hurt, completely unused to being on the receiving end of Dad's anger. "You've never yelled at me before," she said in a small voice. Dad's response was brutal in its honesty. "Because Harper was always there, fixing your mistakes before I saw them. She covered for you constantly, made you look competent when you weren't, and I was too blind to see it. Now she's gone and am finally seeing who you really are without her propping you up." I felt no satisfaction hearing about that confrontation because it was too little, too late. Dad was learning harsh lessons about favoritism and merit. But those lessons came at the cost of his company and his relationship with both daughters. Sometimes consequences teach us things we should have learned much earlier, but by the time we learn them, the damage is already irreversible. 3 months after my departure, Brielle made a desperate attempt to sabotage my professional reputation through online channels. She created multiple fake social media accounts, using variations of common names and generic profile pictures. Through these accounts, she posted accusations claiming that I had stolen proprietary information from Dad's company and engaged in corporate espionage by taking trade secrets to a competitor. The posts appeared on professional networking sites, industry forums, and even in comment sections of articles that had featured my work at Tech Vanguard. The accusations were serious enough that they caught the attention of Tech Vanguard's legal team, who brought their concerns directly to James. He called me into his office, looking troubled, explaining that the board had received anonymous emails making similar claims about industrial espionage and demanding investigation before the allegations damaged the company's reputation. I felt a familiar anger rising, but forced myself to remain calm and professional, knowing that emotional reactions would only make the situation worse. I spent several hours that evening compiling complete documentation to address every accusation Brielle had made. I provided my employment contract showing the absence of non-compete clauses, detailed timelines proving that all systems I developed at Tech Vanguard were created after I left Dad's company, and evidence that I had brought nothing proprietary with me, except my own expertise and knowledge. I also demonstrated that every major innovation I created at Tech Vanguard was fundamentally different in architecture and approach from anything I had built previously, showing clear technological advancement rather than theft. Then I did something Brielle hadn't anticipated because she didn't understand technology well enough to cover her tracks properly. I traced the fake social media accounts back to their source by examining IP addresses, account creation patterns, and linguistic markers in the posts themselves. The accounts had all been created from the same location within a 3-day period, and the writing style matched Brielle's previous communications exactly. She had even made the mistake of accessing several accounts from her home internet connection, leaving a digital trail that conclusively proved her involvement. I presented all of this evidence to James, showing him not only that the accusations were false but also who had made them and why. James was furious on my behalf, immediately wanting to pursue legal action against Brielle for defamation and attempted harm to Tech Vanguard's business interests. I appreciated his protective instinct but declined to pursue litigation. "She's destroying herself without any help from me," I told him calmly. "Legal action would just drag this out and keep me connected to that family drama. Let her face the consequences of her own actions without me giving her more attention." James respected my decision but insisted that his legal team send Brielle a formal cease and desist letter, warning her of serious legal consequences if she continued making false accusations. The letter was delivered by certified mail and copied to Dad as the owner of their company, making it clear that Tech Vanguard had evidence of Brielle's actions and was prepared to defend both the company and my reputation vigorously. Brielle panicked when she received the letter. She called me for the first time in 3 months, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. I hesitated before answering but decided I wanted to hear what she had to say. "Please make them stop," she begged immediately. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to help Dad save the company. Please tell them not to sue me." I felt no sympathy for her manufactured distress. "You tried to destroy my career because yours is failing," I said flatly. "You accused me of crimes I didn't commit and tried to ruin my professional reputation. Why would I help you now?" Brielle's voice rose with frustration mixed with tears. "You abandoned us. Dad's company is dying, and it's your fault for leaving and taking everyone with you." I couldn't believe she was actually trying to blame me for the consequences of their own actions. "I didn't abandon anyone, Brielle. I was suspended without pay for refusing to apologize for your theft of my work. I left because staying meant accepting a lifetime of being invisible while you took credit for my accomplishments. That's not abandonment, that's self-preservation." There was a long silence before Brielle said something I never expected to hear. "I was jealous. Okay." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You were always smarter than me. Better at everything that mattered. Dad loved you for your brain and your talent, even if he didn't show it the right way. I only had being his favorite, being the pretty one he liked to show off. I knew I couldn't compete with you on merit, so I used the only advantage I had." I absorbed this admission, feeling complex emotions I couldn't quite name. "You had everything I wanted," I told her quietly. "His pride, his attention, his unconditional love and protection. I would have given anything for even a fraction of what he gave you automatically. And somehow it still wasn't enough for you. You had to take my work too. Take the one thing I had that was actually mine." Brielle started crying harder, begging me to come back and save Dad's company, claiming it was all falling apart and only I could fix it. I refused firmly, explaining that I had built a new career where I was valued and respected, and I had no intention of returning to an environment where my worth was questioned constantly. The conversation ended with her still crying and me feeling emotionally exhausted but certain I had made the right choice. A week later, Dad's company filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11. Unable to pay its accumulated debts and facing multiple lawsuits from angry clients. Creditors lined up to collect what they could from the remaining assets, and Dad was forced to begin selling off equipment, intellectual property, and even the office building to satisfy obligations. It was a stunning fall for a company that had been successful just months earlier, but the collapse was inevitable once the technical foundation I had built was removed without adequate replacement. In a twist of irony that felt almost poetic, Tech Vanguard ended up purchasing Dad's company's remaining intellectual property and client contracts for a fraction of what they would have been worth before the collapse. I had recused myself from any involvement in the acquisition decision, not wanting my personal history to influence business strategy, but the board recognized the opportunity to acquire a former competitor's assets at bargain prices. Dad's company effectively ceased to exist as an independent entity, absorbed into Tech Vanguard's portfolio. Everything he had built over decades ended up belonging to the company that employed his estranged daughter. 6 months after my suspension, Dad requested a meeting with me through a neutral intermediary, a business consultant we both knew professionally. I initially declined because I didn't see what purpose a conversation would serve, but the consultant explained that Dad specifically wanted to speak with me privately, without lawyers or family members present, to discuss things that had nothing to do with business. Something in that message made me reconsider. Perhaps curiosity about what he wanted to say, or maybe a lingering hope that he had finally developed some self-awareness about the situation. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop across town, neutral territory where neither of us would feel uncomfortable or defensive. I arrived first and ordered coffee, choosing a corner table where we could talk without being overheard. Dad walked in a few minutes later, and I was startled by how much older he looked. He had aged visibly in 6 months, his hair grayer, his face drawn with stress and exhaustion, His shoulders hunched in a way they never had been when he was riding high on business success. He sat down across from me and began with what I suppose he thought was an apology, though it fell far short of adequate. "I may have been too harsh with the suspension," he said carefully, as if testing the waters. "The situation was complicated, and perhaps I didn't handle it as well as I could have." I felt my jaw tighten at the weak attempt to minimize what he had done. "You suspended me without pay for telling the truth," I said directly. "You chose to believe Brielle's lies over evidence from multiple witnesses, including timestamps and email records. That wasn't complicated, Dad. That was a choice." Dad became defensive immediately, falling back into old patterns. "She's my daughter. I was trying to protect her from accusations that seemed designed to tear her down out of jealousy." I leaned forward, making sure he heard every word clearly. "I'm your daughter too. You just never acted like it. Not when it mattered. Not when I needed you to defend me. Not when I accomplished things worthy of pride. I was always the backup daughter, the one you could take for granted because you knew I'd still be there trying to earn your approval." His defenses crumbled slightly, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely pained. He began explaining his perspective, trying to help me understand his reasoning even if it didn't excuse his behavior. "After my mother died 3 years ago," he said, "he couldn't bear the thought of losing Brielle too. He knew she was fragile in ways I wasn't, that she struggled with insecurity and needed more support. He saw me as strong and capable, able to handle adversity without falling apart. He convinced himself that giving Brielle extra attention and protection was necessary because I didn't need those things from him." I shook my head slowly, frustrated by how completely he had misunderstood the situation. "I needed my father," I said quietly but firmly. "I needed you to see me, to value me, to defend me when I was being treated unfairly. Just once, I needed you to choose me over her when it actually mattered. Strength doesn't mean not needing support. It just means I learned to survive without it because you never offered it when I needed it most." Dad admitted that he had taken me for granted, assuming I would always be there because I was loyal and competent and dedicated to the company. He never imagined I would actually leave because I had stayed for so long despite the favoritism and lack of recognition. He thought my loyalty was unconditional, that family bonds would always keep me there no matter how I was treated. It hadn't occurred to him that everyone has a breaking point, and he had finally pushed me past mine. Then he revealed something that genuinely surprised me. He had discovered the truth about the presentation theft just a few weeks after my suspension. He found my original files on the company server with clear timestamps proving I had created everything Brielle presented. When he confronted her with the evidence, she had broken down and admitted stealing my work, claiming she had felt desperate to prove herself valuable to the company and to him. She confessed to accessing my computer, changing file ownership, and deliberately planning the theft days in advance. I stared at him in shock. "You knew the truth weeks after you suspended me," I asked slowly. "You knew I had been telling the truth, and you still didn't reach out to apologize or ask me to come back." Dad looked ashamed but explained that his pride had prevented him from admitting his mistake. He had hoped I would eventually return on my own, that time would smooth over the conflict, that we could move forward without him having to explicitly acknowledge how wrong he had been. By the time he finally swallowed his pride enough to reach out, I had already signed with Tech Vanguard and was moving forward with my new career. "I lost everything," Dad said, his voice breaking slightly. "The company is gone, my reputation is damaged, investors won't trust me with new ventures. But the worst part, Harper, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I lost you. I destroyed our relationship because I was too proud and too blind to see what I was doing until it was too late to fix it." I felt a complicated mix of emotions churning inside me. Pity for his obvious pain, anger at the years of mistreatment, sadness for what our relationship could have been, vindication at finally being proven right, and exhaustion from carrying all of this for so long. But underneath all those feelings was a sense of resolution, a clarity about what I needed to say to him. "You didn't lose me because of the suspension," I told him carefully, making sure he understood the real issue. You lost me because of 28 years of choosing Brielle over me in every single situation that mattered. The suspension was just the final proof of a pattern that had been there my whole life. Every time you believed her excuses over my achievements, every time you gave her credit for my work, every time you defended her mediocrity while questioning my competence, you were making a choice about which daughter mattered more to you. The suspension just made that choice so obvious that I finally couldn't ignore it anymore. Dad asked quietly if there was any chance for rebuilding our relationship, if he could somehow earn forgiveness for the years of favoritism and blindness. I considered the question honestly before answering. Maybe someday, I said, not wanting to give him false hope but also not wanting to completely close the door. But not now, and not soon. I need time to build my life without it revolving around seeking your approval. I need to know who I am when I'm not trying to prove my worth to you. I need to heal from 28 years of being second place in my own father's heart. Dad nodded slowly, accepting that answer even though it clearly wasn't what he hoped to hear. He asked one final question, and I could tell it mattered deeply to him. Are you happy, Harper? In your new job, in your new life, are you genuinely happy? I thought about it for a moment, assessing honestly rather than just giving him the answer he wanted or the one that would hurt him most. Yes, I said with a genuine smile. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of myself not because of external validation but because I know my own worth. I have a career where my contributions are recognized and valued. I lead a team that respects my expertise. I'm dating someone who loves my intelligence and ambition instead of feeling threatened by them. I've built friendships outside the family dynamics that kept me small. I'm happy, Dad. And I did it by walking away from a situation where I was never going to be happy, no matter how hard I tried. We parted ways without a dramatic reconciliation or a complete severing of ties, just an honest acknowledgement of where we stood and where we might or might not go from there. It wasn't the ending to the conversation that either of us had probably imagined, but it was honest and real, and that mattered more than a tidy resolution. 1 full year after my suspension, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days when Dad first told me I wasn't welcome at the family company. I had thrived as Chief Technology Officer at Tech Vanguard, leading the company to new levels of innovation and market success. My original team of 8 engineers had expanded to 25 talented professionals who genuinely respected my leadership and technical expertise. We had launched 3 major products in 12 months, each one exceeding performance expectations and attracting significant client interest. On a personal level, I had grown in ways that went far beyond professional success. I was dating someone I met through mutual friends in the tech industry, someone who found my intelligence attractive rather than intimidating, and who supported my ambitions without feeling threatened by them. I had built real friendships with people outside work, relationships based on mutual interests and genuine connection rather than family obligation or professional networking. I had started mentoring young women in technology through a nonprofit organization, helping them navigate career challenges and build confidence in their technical abilities. Watching them grow reminded me of my own journey and made me grateful for how far I had come. The tech industry recognized my contributions with an innovation award at a major conference, honoring the AI systems I had developed at Tech Vanguard. Standing on stage accepting the award felt surreal, looking out at hundreds of professionals applauding work that I had done and ideas that came from my own creativity and expertise. During my acceptance speech, I kept my remarks professional and focused on thanking my team, but I included one line that referenced my journey in a subtle way that only people who knew the full story would understand. Sometimes the greatest gift is someone showing you exactly how little they value you, I said carefully, because it forces you to finally value yourself. The audience responded with a standing ovation, and I saw several people in the crowd nodding with recognition as if my words had touched something in their own experiences. Most attendees didn't know the personal context behind that statement, but the message resonated universally, because many people have felt undervalued or overlooked at some point in their lives. The applause felt validating in a way that had nothing to do with my father's approval or lack thereof. Brielle reached out occasionally through text messages, usually late at night when she was probably feeling lonely or nostalgic. Her messages were a mixture of apology and self-pity, asking if we could talk or meet for coffee, claiming she wanted to repair our relationship. I responded politely but maintained clear boundaries, keeping my messages brief and declining invitations to meet. I didn't hate her anymore, which surprised me, but I also didn't trust her or feel any desire to rebuild a relationship that had always been unhealthy. Some relationships are better left in the past, and our sisterhood fell into that category. Dad sold the large family home where we had grown up, downsizing to a modest condo that reflected his reduced financial circumstances. He took consulting work to pay off remaining debts from the company bankruptcy, helping other small businesses with strategic planning. I heard through family connections that he had become more humble, that the experience of losing everything had changed his perspective on what mattered. I felt no satisfaction in his reduced circumstances because I had never wanted him to suffer. I had just wanted him to see me, and by the time he finally did, too much damage had been done to easily repair. I learned an important lesson during that year about the difference between revenge and consequence. I could have actively tried to destroy Dad's company through sabotage or malicious competition, but I hadn't done that. I had simply removed my skills and labor from a situation where they weren't valued, and the company had collapsed under the weight of its own dysfunction. That wasn't revenge. That was natural consequence. The business had been surviving on my unacknowledged contributions, and when I stopped providing them, the reality of the situation became unavoidable. There was a kind of justice in that outcome, but it was the justice of truth revealing itself rather than vindictive punishment. One Sunday morning, exactly 1 year after my suspension, I sat in my apartment with coffee in hand, looking out at the city skyline and reflecting on how much had changed. My phone rang, and I saw it was Dad calling on his birthday. I hesitated for just a moment before answering, making a conscious choice about the kind of person I wanted to be regardless of how I had been treated. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said simply. We talked briefly about nothing particularly important, keeping the conversation light and cordial. It was a small gesture, but it was my choice made on my terms, and that felt important. After we hung up, I sat with my thoughts for a while, processing the complicated feelings that still existed around my relationship with my father and sister. I realized that I was no longer angry, which felt like a significant shift from the raw pain I had experienced a year earlier. I wasn't interested in reconciliation yet, and maybe I never would be, but I had reached a place of peace with the situation. I had stopped waiting for them to change or acknowledge what they had done, stopped needing their validation to feel good about my accomplishments, stopped defining myself by whether or not they could see my value. Several life lessons had emerged clearly through the experience of that difficult year. Family isn't always determined by blood relation. It's defined by who genuinely sees your worth and supports your growth. The people who share your genetics might never understand or appreciate you, while friends and colleagues might become the real family that celebrates your successes and catches you when you stumble. I had found that kind of chosen family at Tech Vanguard and in my personal life, and those relationships mattered more than the biological connections that had caused me so much pain. Another lesson involved understanding when walking away is the strongest choice you can make. For years I had believed that perseverance and loyalty were the ultimate virtues, that giving up on family was a sign of weakness or failure. But I learned that resignation from an unhealthy situation isn't defeat, it's liberation. Staying in a job or relationship where you're consistently diminished doesn't make you noble, it makes you complicit in your own mistreatment. The bravest thing I ever did was say all right to that suspension and mean it as the beginning of my exit rather than the beginning of my apology. I also learned that the best response to being undervalued isn't elaborate revenge schemes or attempts to make people feel guilty for how they treated you. The best response is building the life you actually deserve, pursuing opportunities that recognize your worth, and surrounding yourself with people who appreciate what you bring to the table. My success at Tech Vanguard wasn't designed to hurt Dad, even though it did hurt him. It was designed to fulfill my own potential in an environment that made that possible. The fact that my success highlighted what he had lost was just a side effect of me finally prioritizing my own growth. Perhaps the most important lesson was about self-worth and where it comes from. I had spent 28 years trying to earn my father's approval, believing that if I just worked hard enough, accomplished enough, proved myself sufficiently, he would finally see me the way he saw Brielle. But that approval never came, and the suspension forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I couldn't control whether other people valued me, but I could control whether I valued myself. Once I stopped making my self-worth dependent on external validation, I discovered a kind of peace and confidence I had never experienced before. I got up from my spot by the window and prepared for the day ahead, which included a team meeting to plan our next major project at Tech Vanguard. My team was excited about the new direction we were exploring, and I felt energized by their enthusiasm and the creative possibilities in front of us. My future looked bright not because I had defeated enemies or gotten revenge on people who hurt me, but because I had finally given myself permission to pursue success on my own terms. As I gathered my things to leave for the office, I thought about that moment a year ago when Dad told me I was suspended and I said, "All right," with a calm that shocked everyone in the room. They had heard resignation and defeat in that word, but what I actually meant was something completely different. I was saying all right to releasing myself from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval that would never come. I was saying all right to valuing my own judgment about my worth instead of waiting for someone else to validate it. I was saying all right to walking away from people who had shown me repeatedly that they would never appreciate what I offered. I was saying all right to building a life where I could finally be proud of myself, not because of what others thought, but because I knew my own value. That single word, spoken calmly in the face of what was meant to be devastating punishment, had changed everything. It marked the moment I stopped living for my father's approval and started living for my own fulfillment and growth. And that made all the difference in ways I was still discovering every day. So let me ask you, have you ever had to make the difficult choice between staying where you're undervalued or walking away to find your worth elsewhere? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear about your experiences with family dynamics or workplace situations where you had to stand up for yourself. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength you didn't know you had. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to walk away from people or situations that consistently diminish their value. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope it reminded you that you deserve to be in spaces where your contributions are recognized and your worth is never questioned. Whatever challenges you're facing in your own life, I wish you the courage to value yourself enough to pursue the opportunities and relationships you truly deserve. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.